cortex, so to speak, but that it was the subcortical structures and the old part of cortex, the cingulate and the cingulate gyrus and related structures, that was going to be the essential part of the story. And he made this observation, which I thought was very prescient, and I think is probably right. He said, well, here notice what is new with mammals. He was a great observer of animals as well. Nursing and parental care. You basically don't see it in crocodiles. Playful behavior, learning social skills, learning the social norms. Separation vocalization, right? So the infant is alone and it whimpers and cries and or what have you. And then mate attachment. Those four things. And he said then, the history of the evolution of mammals is the history of the development of a family way of life. And I think that that's an interesting idea. And it's become more interesting in the last decade because of the understanding of the role of peptides in social attachment. And so here we have the nursing mother. The infant gets oxytocin release in this condition, and that helps form permanent attachment. The mother gets oxytocin release in her brain. And actually, the infant also gets oxytocin through the milk. And here, of course, we have baboons with a baboon infant. And notice how, I mean, this is not something you see, again, in crocodiles or in turtles. But it is the sort of thing that is common in primates. Now, I want to quickly get to my favorite story, which is the story of the voles. Now, this is a story that came about actually, first of all, because somebody noticed what you might call the most primitive social behavior in, of all things, C. elegans. In C. elegans, the nematode, right? The teeny nematode. It's only got 1,000 plus neurons. So in conditions of food scarcity, there's two kinds of nematodes. There's the nematodes that go off on their own, and there's the nematodes that hang together. And it turned out that a simpler form of oxytocin is what's involved. And then people noticed that there are two kinds of voles. There's prairie voles and there's montane voles. They're not interbreedable, but they're very similar in their appearance. And so there's a couple of prairie voles and there's a montane vole. And one significant behavioral difference is that the prairie voles are monogamous pair bonders. After the first mating, there is a rush of oxytocin in the female brain, a rush of vasopressin in the male brain. They are bonded for life. They are also biparental, both take care of the pups. They are very aggressive towards others that intrude into the nest. The montane voles are promiscuous pair bonders. Now, they have oxytocin and vasopressin, so what's the difference? The difference is in the brain and in very particular areas in the brain, ventral pallidum and lateral septum, where there is high density of receptors for vasopressin in males and oxytocin in females. So they did all the manipulations you could think of, right? Change the receptor density in these guys, they become monogamous. Take out the receptors in these guys, they become promiscuous, and so on and so forth. So it turns out that this very simple peptide, and vasopressin and oxytocin differ in only two places. This very simple peptide mediates something, monogamous pair bonding, that I at least was raised to believe was a great cultural achievement of Christianity. I mean, what can you say? And here it is. I mean, I'm a monogamous pair bonder, and I always thought that, I kind of reasoned through this and thought, yes, this is good, this is the way I should be. No, it's probably all the oxytocin and the oxytocin receptors sitting up there in my lateral septum and my ventral pallidum. And I thought I'd made a decision. No, not in any sense that would satisfy the framework of folk psychology. Isn't that amazing? I mean, this is a big life decision, right? To be a monogamous pair bonder. Well, it's a big life style, but it's not exactly a decision. Very interesting.
How did Paul react when he
Yes, well, okay. Can always count on Gary. I won't go into the details of the brain story. Suffice it to say, go online if you want more articles. Sue Carter, Larry Young. And of course, they are looking now at humans. Sue is particularly interested because they discovered that rat pups who don't get cuddled and so forth by their rat mums do not flourish as well, and they have social behavior problems later on. And it has also been observed that human infants who also don't get cuddled and have, regular parental attachment and so forth, have both higher CRF levels. And there's also a change in the glutamate receptors, but I forgot exactly whether it's up or down. But they too have sometimes, for example, difficulties forming long-term relationships and various kinds of social difficulties. So that's an interesting part of the story. The other interesting part of the story was done by Paul Zak and others, and there's somebody else who's done this too, but I forgot who it is. So what would happen if you just, raised my oxytocin level under some conditions? So they thought, well, what we'll do is we'll have these guys play a game. Let's just call it Prisoner's Dilemma to keep it simple. And these guys will play a game. And we're going to give these guys oxytocin. And the way we're going to do it is very simple. You're going to put it in an aerosol and just squirt it up their nose and count on the olfactory bulb to get it where it needs to be, which it pretty much does. So then the question is, what do you see? And the answer is these guys are much more trusting, cooperative, engaging, and these guys behave like normals. Very interesting. Is it that they're generally just sort of gotten warm and fuzzy? I mean, and so you have them play the Prisoner's Dilemma game with a computer, you don't see it. So it's human interactions that change. I think this is really big stuff. I don't know where it's all going, and I don't know what it all means, and but I think it's immensely interesting. This is the last slide then. So I just feel that given all of these developments that it's exciting to kind of think about values and to think about morality in a different way. That evolution has sort of set the kind of parameters for the brain style of our drives and emotions and our basic nature. But of course, part of our basic nature is that we are great imitators, as Tomasello was fond of pointing out, but also that we have great plasticity. So we can learn many different kinds of social conventions, some of which really penetrate quite deeply into our sense of ourselves. But these are, I think, things that we can understand in a biological way without really needing to rely on metaphysics in any sort of grand sense at all. Thanks. Yeah.
Yes, in your models of control and out of control, and also the last thing on oxytocin and oxytocin, these are chemical axes that you're using to represent this behavior, but there's a lot more just to chemistry to control behavior. For example,
Yes.
there's neuronal activity and oscillation.
Absolutely.
And for something like Tourette's, or Parkinson's, let's say, if someone has a tremor that is completely out of their control, you could just put a deep brain stimulator and you could make that pattern completely go away. Just
Yeah.
like you need memory potential.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's a lot more to this thing of being
Oh, yes.
control or control.
Yes.
at different scales. The